They decided who he was before he reached the center of the room, before he spoke, before anyone asked his name, and that was their first mistake. The gala wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Power rarely shouted. It observed, measured, categorized. Crystal lights reflected across polished marble floors, while conversations moved like quiet chess matches. Every person inside knew the rules. Who mattered, who didn't, who belonged, and who clearly did not. When he walked in, the shift happened immediately. Not obvious, not dramatic, just small pauses in conversations, eyes narrowing slightly, smiles tightening. The silent language of judgment. He felt it instantly. He always did. He wore a dark coat. Simple, clean, unbranded. No visible symbols of wealth. No designer logos. No signals that made people comfortable. And in rooms like this, comfort was currency. At a nearby table, 3 investors leaned toward each other. One of them laughed quietly. "Wrong door," he murmured. The others smiled, not openly cruel, just dismissive. The kind of dismissal people use when they believe they are safe from being wrong. He didn't react, not to the stares, not to the whispers, not to the subtle ways people stepped slightly aside without acknowledging him. Instead, he walked slowly, calmly, like someone who had been in rooms far more dangerous than this one, and that alone confused people. Because insecurity looked different, and he showed none. A woman across the room noticed it first, the stillness, the quiet confidence. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to disappear either. He moved like someone who didn't need approval. That made her watch longer. Near the bar, a man in an expensive suit bumped into him, hard enough to feel intentional. No apology. Just a glance that said, "You're in the wrong place." He steadied himself without looking offended. "Excuse me?" he said softly. The man smirked. "Careful," he replied. "These events aren't for tourists." A few people nearby laughed quietly. The moment lasted only seconds. But the room felt it, because social hierarchies were being reinforced, or so they thought. He turned toward the balcony instead. City lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass. He stood there quietly, watching, not retreating, not hiding, just waiting. And that waiting made some people uncomfortable without knowing why. Behind him, whispers multiplied. Who invited him? Staff. Security should check. Each assumption built another invisible wall between him and everyone else, and with every second, they became more certain they were right. A young event coordinator approached cautiously, professional smile, careful tone. "Sir," she said gently, "may I ask who you're here with?" The question sounded polite, but its meaning was clear. Explain yourself. Prove you belong. He turned slowly, met her eyes, and smiled, not defensive, not arrogant, just calm. "You'll know soon," he said. Across the room, laughter rose again. Glasses clinked, deals continued. People returned to their conversations, confident that they had already understood everything about him. They didn't realize the energy of the room had already begun to change, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody bothers to look at twice. And sometimes judgment travels faster than truth. They kept watching him, even when they pretended not to. That was the first sign the room had begun to change. From the balcony, he observed quietly. City lights stretched endlessly beneath him, reflections dancing across glass like distant stars. Behind him, laughter rose and fell in calculated waves, conversations about acquisitions, investments, influence. Every word measured, every gesture strategic. He listened without appearing to listen, and slowly, people noticed that he wasn't uncomfortable. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't scanning for approval. He simply existed, and that unsettled them. Inside the hall, Whispers multiplied. "Who is he? Someone's guest? Maybe new money? No, not dressed like it." Assumptions layered on top of assumptions, none of them correct. The man who had bumped into him earlier leaned toward his friends again. "He hasn't left yet," he said quietly. One of the others chuckled. "Maybe he thinks this is a public event." They laughed, not loudly, just enough for nearby guests to feel included in the joke. Social alignment, unspoken agreement. He was an outsider, and outsiders were safe targets. Until they weren't. The woman who had been watching him earlier approached slowly. She carried herself differently than the others, less rigid, more curious. She stopped beside him at the balcony. "You don't look lost," she said gently. He smiled slightly. "I'm not," she nodded. "I noticed." Silence settled comfortably between them for a moment. Unlike the rest of the room, she didn't rush to categorize him. That made her different. "You're not trying to network," she said. "No." "You're not trying to avoid people either?" "No." She tilted her head. "So what are you doing?" He turned back toward the city lights. "Listening." The answer intrigued her. Most people here spoke to be heard. He listened to understand. Behind them, the energy of the gala shifted again. A small group near the entrance suddenly grew quieter. Phones appeared. Someone checked a message. Another guest turned toward the balcony, toward him, then quickly looked away. Something invisible had started moving through the room, like a ripple traveling faster than sound. The coordinator returned, this time with a senior host beside her. The host wore the practiced smile of someone used to handling delicate situations. "Good evening," he said smoothly. "Sir, we just want to ensure everyone is comfortable tonight." Translation: "We're verifying whether you belong." He nodded politely. "I appreciate that." The host hesitated. The calm response had disrupted his expectation. "May I confirm your invitation?" The woman beside him watched carefully. She sensed something building, something the rest of the room hadn't realized yet. He reached slowly into his coat. Not hurried, not defensive, just deliberate. The host's posture tightened slightly. Nearby guests leaned closer without appearing obvious. Curiosity had replaced dismissal. He handed over a simple card. The host glanced down. His expression changed instantly. Not shock, not confusion. Recognition. Then, something deeper. Respect. The shift happened so quickly that only a few people noticed. But those who did felt it like a sudden drop in temperature. The host straightened, cleared his throat, and his voice carried louder than intended. "Sir, we've been expecting you." The words landed across the room like a quiet explosion. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned. Laughter died instantly. The invisible hierarchy of the gala began to fracture. The man simply nodded, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if this moment had always been inevitable. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know who they had just dismissed. The room didn't grow louder, it grew quieter, and that silence carried more weight than any applause ever could. The words still hung in the air. "We've been expecting you." Guests exchanged subtle glances, trying not to appear curious. But curiosity had already taken control, because in rooms ruled by status, recognition meant everything. And now, something had changed. The host's posture shifted completely. Moments ago, he had approached cautiously, ready to verify an outsider. Now he stood straighter, more attentive, careful with his tone. "Sir," he said respectfully, "please allow me to escort you." The difference was subtle, but everyone felt it. The man nodded once. No dramatic reaction, no satisfaction, just quiet acceptance. And that unsettled people even more, because power usually announced itself. His did not. As they walked back into the center of the gala, Conversations slowed. Eyes followed. The investors who had laughed earlier stopped smiling. One of them whispered, "Who is he?" No one answered, because suddenly, no one wanted to be wrong out loud. The woman from the balcony walked beside them. She watched the shift carefully. People who had ignored him now stepped aside respectfully. Servers moved faster. Guests straightened their posture. The social gravity of the room had reoriented, and nobody fully understood why yet. Near the bar, the man who had bumped into him earlier froze. Recognition flickered across his face. Not recognition of identity, but recognition of status. And status changed behavior instantly. He raised his glass awkwardly. "Hey, I didn't realize..." The man simply nodded and kept walking. No confrontation, no acknowledgement beyond basic courtesy. And that hurt more than anger would have, because indifference revealed hierarchy more clearly than words. At the center of the hall stood a small stage where the evening's main announcement was meant to take place. The host guided him there. Microphones waited. Screens behind the stage displayed the logo of the organization hosting the gala, a large investment group known for shaping entire industries. People gathered quickly now, sensing something important was about to happen. The host leaned closer and spoke quietly. "They're ready whenever you are." The man glanced across the crowd. Faces that had judged him minutes earlier now watched with anticipation, curiosity, nervousness, and something else. Hope that they hadn't made a mistake. He stepped onto the stage. The movement felt simple, but the effect was immediate. The room fell completely silent. The main organizer approached the microphone. Her voice carried smoothly across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight." Polite applause followed. "We've spoken all evening about vision, leadership, and transformation." She paused deliberately. "And now, I would like to introduce the person responsible for the future direction of this entire initiative." A ripple moved through the audience. She turned toward him, smiled, and said clearly, "Our new majority partner and chairman." The words landed like thunder. Shock spread across faces. Conversations died instantly, because the quiet man they had dismissed was the most powerful person in the room. And suddenly, every laugh from earlier felt louder in memory. Every glance felt heavier. Every assumption felt dangerous. He stepped toward the microphone. The room held its breath, because now everyone needed to hear him speak. The silence felt heavier now. Not the polite quiet of wealthy guests waiting for a speech. This silence carried tension, regret, and a quiet fear that people had revealed more about themselves than they intended. He stood at the microphone, still calm, still composed, the same man they had dismissed minutes earlier. But now every detail about him felt different. His posture looked stronger. His stillness felt intentional. Even the simplicity of his clothing suddenly looked deliberate instead of ordinary. Nothing about him had changed, only their perception. He let the silence stretch, not to create drama, just to allow the room to settle. When he spoke, his voice was steady, deep without force. "Thank you for welcoming me tonight." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The sentence sounded polite, but underneath it carried meaning, because many of them had not welcomed him at all. "I've spent many years entering rooms where people decided who I was before I spoke," he continued. "No accusation, no bitterness, just truth." Some guests looked down, others forced neutral expressions. The investors who had laughed earlier avoided eye contact entirely. He paused, not long, just enough for the words to sink deeper. "I don't blame them," he added gently. "That surprised people. They expected confrontation. Instead, they received understanding." "People rely on shortcuts," he said. "Clothing, appearance, assumptions." A few nervous chuckles moved through the crowd. None lasted long. The woman from the balcony watched closely. She understood what others were just beginning to realize. He wasn't humiliating them. He was revealing something deeper. "When I walked in tonight," he said calmly, "I heard laughter." The room froze again. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. "And I also saw curiosity," he continued, "and kindness from some." The statement softened the tension slightly, but only slightly. He looked across the audience slowly, meeting eyes, not judging, just observing. "Power," he said quietly, "is not defined by who enters the room first, but by who people choose to respect before they know anything." The sentence landed deeply, because everyone knew exactly what he meant. He stepped away from the microphone slightly. Not dramatic, just reflective. "I didn't come here to prove anything," he continued. "I came here to build something." The tone shifted, from personal to visionary. People leaned forward again, but now with genuine interest instead of judgment. "This initiative is about opening doors that have been closed for too long," he said. "About seeing potential where others see difference." The words felt intentional, layered, each sentence reshaping how people viewed him and themselves. Near the bar, the man who had bumped into him earlier lowered his eyes. Embarrassment replaced arrogance. He wasn't alone. Across the room, people replayed their own reactions in their minds, every glance, every assumption, every whisper. He returned to the microphone for one final thought. "The truth is, we reveal who we are long before we realize we're being seen." The sentence hung in the air, quiet, powerful, unavoidable. Applause began slowly. Not forced, not polite, real, growing stronger as people realized they were witnessing something larger than a business announcement. They were witnessing themselves being reflected back, and for the first time since he entered the room, they weren't measuring him anymore. They were measuring themselves. The applause didn't stop immediately. It built slowly. Not because people wanted to impress him, because something inside them had shifted, and they didn't fully understand why. He stepped away from the microphone. No dramatic gestures, no extended acknowledgement, just a quiet nod, the same calm presence he had carried since walking through the doors. But now, every movement felt heavier, more meaningful, because the room finally understood who they were watching. Conversations restarted cautiously, not the confident networking from earlier, quieter, measured. People chose their words more carefully now, because every sentence felt like it might reveal something about them. The investors who had laughed earlier stood together, suddenly unsure what to do. One cleared his throat. "We should go introduce ourselves." Another nodded quickly. "Yes, definitely." But none of them moved immediately. Because approaching him now meant confronting their own behavior from earlier. And that felt uncomfortable. Near the balcony, the woman who had spoken with him watched the room carefully. She noticed the difference immediately. People who had ignored him were now adjusting their posture when he walked by. Smiles were warmer, voices softer. Respect replaced dismissal with startling speed. Status had rewritten reality. The young coordinator approached him again. Her tone carried genuine warmth now. "Sir, everyone is asking to meet you." He smiled slightly. "They were asking earlier too," he said gently. She flushed slightly, unsure how to respond. He nodded kindly. "It's all right." The words released her tension instantly, because there was no anger in him, only awareness. Across the room, Marcus, the man who had bumped into him, finally approached. His confidence from earlier had disappeared. He adjusted his jacket nervously. "Sir," he said, forcing a smile, "I think we met earlier." The man looked at him calmly. "Yes," Marcus swallowed. "I didn't realize." He stopped. because every possible sentence sounded weak. Apologies felt small, excuses felt worse. The man waited patiently, not rushing him, not judging, just present. "I misjudged you," Marcus said finally. The honesty surprised even himself. The man nodded once. "It happens," he replied softly. The lack of bitterness made the moment heavier, because forgiveness without punishment revealed the truth more clearly. People nearby pretended not to listen, but they were, watching, learning. One by one, guests approached him, not aggressively, carefully. Conversations began, real conversations, not transactional ones. Questions about his vision, his story, his goals. And slowly, the room transformed, not into a place of hierarchy, but into a space of curiosity. The woman from the balcony joined him again. "You handled that differently than most people would," she said. He smiled. "Anger teaches very little," he replied. "And what does patience teach?" He looked around the room. "That people eventually reveal themselves." She nodded slowly. "Understanding." Near the stage, the main organizer watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. The reveal had worked better than she expected, not because it shocked people, because it changed them. He glanced once more across the room. The same faces, the same people, but completely different energy. And he knew something they didn't. This wasn't about status. It wasn't about power. It was about perspective, and perspective was the most valuable thing anyone could walk away with tonight. The night didn't end loudly. It changed quietly, and that made it unforgettable. The gala continued, music returning, conversations restarting, but the energy felt different now, not sharper, not tense, just more aware. People listened longer before speaking. They watched more carefully before judging. And every time he moved through the room, conversations softened, as if people understood they were being observed in ways that had nothing to do with status. He stood near the balcony again, the same place he had stood when the laughter had begun. Only now, people approached respectfully instead of cautiously. Questions replaced assumptions. Curiosity replaced dismissal. The transformation felt almost unreal. Yet nothing about him had changed, only their understanding. The woman from earlier joined him one last time. "You changed the entire room without raising your voice," she said quietly. He shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "They changed themselves," she smiled. "That's generous. It's accurate." He glanced back at the crowd. "People aren't usually cruel," he said softly. "They're just fast." "Fast at what?" "Deciding." Across the room, Marcus watched from a distance. He replayed the moment in his mind. The smirk, the shoulder bump, the joke. It felt heavier now. Not because he had been embarrassed, because he had revealed something about himself he didn't like. And for the first time that night, he realized the regret wasn't about who the man turned out to be. It was about how he treated someone before knowing anything at all. The organizer approached quietly. "Your car is ready whenever you are," she said. He nodded. "Thank you." Before leaving, he turned once more toward the crowd, not to make another speech, just to observe. Some people looked inspired, some thoughtful, some uncomfortable. All of them changed, even if only slightly. As he walked toward the exit, conversations followed him, softer, more respectful. The doors opened. Cool night air replaced the warmth of the gala. City lights stretched endlessly beyond the entrance. He paused briefly. Not dramatic, just reflective. Because he knew something most people in that room were only beginning to understand. Power wasn't proven by revealing who you were. It was revealed by how you treated others when you believed they were nobody. Behind him, the doors closed. The room continued without him. But the lesson remained, invisible, unavoidable, because sometimes people don't regret judging someone because that person becomes powerful. They regret realizing they revealed who they were before the truth appeared, and that realization stays with them long after the night ends.